All right, hi everyone. My name is Phil Batterson. I'm the staff physiologist for Moxy Monitor, and I am re-recording the demos that we did for the 2024 MNears conference. So these are going to be all the demos that we shared initially for the MNears conference. Unfortunately, the audio got corrupted in the files that were recorded, so we won't have like the actual questions or the demonstrations of me standing in front of the classroom and going through a warm up, which I'll show later, or which I'll talk about later, and the placement sort of things. But this is just going to be a walkthrough of all four of the different presentations that we're going to give. And this is really kind of an overarching discussion of how to use Moxy Monitor best in research. So the big question that we're trying to answer here is, how do you get the most out of skeletal muscle oxygen data? And we really think there's four major things that need to be looked at when we're talking about getting the most out of our muscle oxygen data. The first one is placement. The second one is accuracy. How do we know that a NIRS device is accurate, and what do we define as accurate? How do we use assessment to determine physiological variables like training zones and changes in muscle oxygen thresholds? And then how can we use Moxy and SmO₂ data to derive a warm up and then potentially better understand readiness for different individuals? So this will be four separate presentations. We'll start with the placement one, and then my colleague Andrew Feldman will do the accuracy presentation, and then I'll continue with the assessment and the warm up. So all four of those will be housed separately, just to make it a little bit more digestible. So let's start with principles of placement. And the question we're trying to answer here is, how do we best place the Moxy for reliable, repeatable data collection with high dynamic range? Because that is the biggest thing that we're trying to do, is we're trying to overcome one of the major challenges that occurs with NIRS devices, and that's the placement. So how do we best place the device? And what are the things we can control, and what are the things we can't control? So basically, we have to control what we can control and make note of what could be confounding. And I'm sure most of you who are listening to this already understand, the potential confounders. But the main things that could be confounding NIRS signal, because light from the NIRS device is traveling through tissue before it gets to the muscle. And that tissue consists of skin, connective tissue, adipose tissue, and maybe even some small blood vessels that are, a little bit higher in those layers of tissue thickness that the light is passing through. And I will say that I really think that adipose tissue thickness or skin fold thickness should always be measured. And you can do this one of two ways. You can measure it with skin fold calipers. So you take your arm, pinch, and then your skin fold caliper will give you your skin fold. And that gives you a number that is essentially twice as thick as what the true adipose tissue thickness or tissue layer thickness above the muscle is going to be. Or you can use ultrasound by placing your ultrasound device over top of the place that is being measured by your NIRS device. And then what you do with that is you just measure the true tissue thickness under that's being sensed from the skin all the way to the connective tissue and the muscle. And for Moxy Monitor, it's really important to be aware that adipose tissue thickness or skin thickness it's really important to note, that adipose tissue thickness greater than 15 millimeters can potentially interfere with the Moxy reading. And there's some studies that I'll show in just a second that actually highlight this, but anything above 15 millimeters or 1.5 centimeters could potentially start to interfere with the ability of the device to give, our reliable, repeatable dynamic range of measures. So anything above 15 millimeters of adipose tissue thickness, or that would be 30 millimeters of skin fold thickness. So because a skin fold is essentially double what adipose tissue really is, you just have to be aware that anything above 15 millimeters, you should really consider placing on another muscle site. So if you're working with individuals who have overweight, obesity, then maybe placing on the thighs might not be a great idea, but you can always go to things like the forearm or the calf. And that has typically worked really well with individuals who don't just work with elite level athletes who are, fairly lean. Another thing we need to be aware of is skin pigmentation. The Moxy signal is pretty robust to melanin differences. So if there's, if you have really, really light colored skin all the way to really, really dark colored skin, that doesn't seem to affect the overall signal of the Moxy device. However, tattoos, which are ink added to the layer of skin or just under the layer of skin, they're not always a problem, but they can be a problem, and I'll highlight that in just a couple of slides here. So we recommend to really, unless you can confirm that the tattoo does not interfere with the Moxy signal, don't use the Moxy on a tattoo, and I'll show you why in just a second. So this was a study done by Andrew Feldman, who's going to also be giving a talk about accuracy of NIRS devices, and what he showed is that really anything above, or when we have SmO₂ measurements, and this was after a cuff occlusion, if we have SmO₂ measurements, we're pretty confident, from really, really low levels of adipose tissue thickness to about 15 millimeters of adipose tissue thickness. Then anything after that can start to interfere with the signal, and you can see that, based off of this inflection point that we see in the data. So just be aware that anything above 15 millimeters of adipose tissue thickness, you could start to introduce some changes to the actual signal that you're measuring. So that's just something to be aware of. You can go check out this paper if you're interested down here. So really what we want to ensure is that you have to measure adipose tissue thickness with skinfold or ultrasound, and you have to report it. That is something that reviewers are sticklers on. If you don't measure adipose tissue thickness, then how do we know, the potential for the light that is being emitted by these NIRS devices to actually penetrate into the muscle rather than just being in the tissue. And then if we continue on, we were talking about tattoos a little bit earlier, and this is an example of how tattoos can potentially interfere with the signal. So you can see here, we have an individual who's doing a step test, and their SmO₂ is highly variable and very noisy the entire time, even at really low exercise intensities, and it only seems to get worse as higher and higher exercise intensities are occurring. So this was an individual that I tested. He had a big tattoo on one side. I think it was his right leg, and then no tattoo on his other leg. Luckily, I brought multiple Moxys because when I looked at the signal for the tattoo, or for the Moxy that was on his left vastus lateralis, you can see the data is a lot tighter and not as noisy as on his right vastus lateralis. So this just highlights the need to avoid tattoos where you can. Obviously, you can't always avoid tattoos, but this is what can happen if you have an individual with a tattoo. And it should be noted that this tattoo had a lot of colors on it, specifically red, and so I think that contributed to some of the noisiness that we're seeing in the data. The red tattoo pigment was probably absorbing some of the data, or some of the light, and then potentially interfering with what was coming back. So avoid tattoos where possible, or confirm that the tattoo is not actually interfering with the signal that you are getting. So we just talked about, the things that could be confounding your data or making it noisy or interfering with the data, and that's adipose tissue thickness and, potentially pigments of different color tattoos. But what can we actually control within our placement, of our Moxy and of our NIRS devices? There's three main things or ways that I like to walk through this. And the first one is you have to place the NIRS device on an active muscle. Active muscles are going to be the ones that are consuming the most oxygen, and what you're going to see then is a more dynamic range in the SmO₂ signal as exercise gets harder and harder and harder, or, just as an individual exercises, because that exercise is going to cause a lot of utilization of that oxygen, and then that's going to lead to shifts in SmO₂. You also have to place the NIRS device on a muscle belly. There's a lot of times where I've seen individuals place the the device really close to the knee or really close to the hip or maybe close to the IT band because they get a little too far out on the vastus lateralis, and all of that kind of winds up looking very similar to that tattoo signal that we were seeing earlier. It's very noisy, or maybe it doesn't change very much upon contraction. And the biggest thing that we're looking for is this number 3. We're looking for dynamic SmO₂. We're looking for the ability of SmO₂ to decrease upon load and then increase when that load is removed. And it should be variable based on the intensity of the exercise, with higher intensity exercise leading to a higher change in SmO₂ and lower intensity exercise leading to a lower change in SmO₂. So let's talk about these one by one. So determining an active muscle, typically people measure or use NIRS devices for running and cycling. Those are the most popular forms of exercise that are being monitored during studies. But these principles really apply to anything, from swimming to mountaineering to stair climbing to whatever you can really think of, rowing, those sort of things. But I want to just give examples of running and cycling. And for running, I've found the most success on the middle of the quad, which is the rectus femoris, and the medial gastroc of the uh, calf. Both of these show pretty large dynamic range. I will note that individuals who are primarily running, if they're engaging their gastroc a lot, then their SmO₂ may come down and just stay pretty flat. But walking is really, really nice or walking using the Moxy on the medial gastroc for walking is really, really effective because it doesn't seem to create that decrease in SmO₂ that just remains flat. But you might run into that issue if you do have individuals who are running. Um, the medial gastroc is also really nice for individuals with high adipose tissue thickness. Adipose tissue thickness, like we said, can interfere with the signal, and typically individuals hold more adipose tissue thickness on their quads rather than their lower leg or their calf. So it's always a good option to go with a medial gastroc if you have individuals with higher adipose tissue thickness. I will say with running too, if you have individuals who go and do more like trail running or uphill, more incline running, the vastus lateralis can be really effective for monitoring SmO₂ as well. Then when it comes to cycling, you can the main movers of cycling are the quads, and more specifically, both the rectus femoris and the vastus lateralis have been shown to be really, really effective in terms of high dynamic range during cycling activities. I will say that based on anecdotal evidence and some coaches that we've been working with in the past, the rectus femoris seems to work better for road cyclists, whereas the vastus lateralis seems to work better for triathletes and individuals who are in the aero position fairly regularly. And this will come up when we start to talk about, like the analysis of SmO₂ breakpoints, because the patterns of a, say, limiting muscle versus a non-limiting muscle might be slightly different. But that's a discussion that we can have offline. If you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me. My email is Philip, PHILIP, at moxymonitor.com. So if you have any questions or want to talk about this more, please feel free to reach out to me. And then for cycling too, you can also use the medial gastroc if you're looking for something that's a little bit lower adipose tissue thickness as well. I found good success using, for myself, the vastus lateralis, and then to a lesser extent, I also use the medial gastroc just for testing purposes, just to see how my SmO₂ is changing in both the calf and in the vastus lateralis during exercise. So the key here is that we really want to monitor an active muscle. And by monitoring an active muscle, you're going to get a representation of what is actually occurring from an oxygen demand and supply standpoint a lot better than if you're just doing, like a non-active muscle or something like that. You just don't have quite the dynamic range as you would for non-active muscles versus active muscles. All right, so now that we've selected the active muscle for our individual, now we have to find the muscle belly of the muscle. And it's interesting because I think this pretty straightforward finding the muscle belly when you tell somebody this, but sometimes I think you can get a little bit bogged down in, oh, well, the measurement has to be 5 centimeters from the top of the patella and then over onto the vastus lateralis. I would prefer people to actually just look for the muscle belly and then make the description in your methods match that versus 5 centimeters and then over. And I kind of talk about this right here where I used to follow these exact, objective measures, position superficial to the left or right, position superficial to the left or right, M vastus lateralis, 10 centimeters superior to the proximal edge of the patella. So I would go up, I would find the patella, go up 10 centimeters, and then I would go to the VL. And then there was another paper that I did where it was 2/3 along the line from the top of the hip to the patella on the vastus lateralis. And, I think we really need to start to get away from this a little bit more because everybody's anatomy is different. And really what it comes down to is that placement needs to be individualized based on someone's anatomy. And as we can see here, these individuals do have different anatomy. This individual has quite the pronounced, vastus lateralis, whereas this individual is a lot thinner and has longer muscle bellies. And one of the keys when you're placing the Moxy on either of these individuals would be to have them stick their heel into the ground and then straighten their leg. So essentially they're flexing their leg. And what you're going to see is that when the leg is flexed, there will be bulges in muscle. Just like when I flex my arm, my bicep bulges out. You're going to want to place the Moxy where the biggest muscular bulge is, to say it as crudely as possible, right? And you're going to want to make sure the Moxy is curved. You're going to want to make sure to have the curve of the Moxy go with the curve of the muscle. Again, that might seem obvious, but you'd be really surprised. There's a lot of people who turn it the other way, and then there's not as much contact with the Moxy to the muscle as you would if you actually put the curvature of the Moxy with the curvature of the muscle. So I already kind of outlined this, but this is how I go through finding the muscle belly. Have the individual place their heel into the ground and then straighten their leg. This allows them to actually flex their calf without you having to tell them, hey, flex your calf. Then what you need to do is you need to find the largest portion of the muscle when flexed. And it's okay to like kind of palpate the area to see, does it feel like tendon or does it feel like muscle? And then place the Moxy parallel with the muscle fibers of the muscle belly. So if the muscle is running, from the attachment point at the knee to the hip, then you want to place the Moxy curvature with the curvature of the curvature of the muscle. So now we've gotten the muscle belly down. And then before you do anything in terms of exercise or anything like that, you have to test that you have dynamic SmO₂. There is nothing worse than bringing an individual through 4 hours of testing all to find out that SmO₂ didn't change the entire time, or it was super noisy, something along those lines. And it's quite easy to actually test this placement before starting your protocol. And what I recommend is have the individual complete a squat and hold, so eccentric squat holds. And this only has to be really a quarter or a half squat. And SmO₂ should really decrease on load. Another thing that people have recommended to me in the past is just have them kind of like bounce up and down into a quarter squat. So quarter squat back up, quarter squat back up. It you should see SmO₂ start to come back down as they complete it, and then you tell them to rest, and then SmO₂ will come back up. And then after you've confirmed that uh, SmO₂ goes down, based on the squats, then have the individual do a short portion of the required exercise. So have them run or cycle easy. Um, Again, this is just to double check. Hey, is this Moxy placement going to give us a decrease immediately upon load? And then when we take that exercise off, is it going to uh, rebound after that? So double check, start with the squats, go to the required exercise. And if SmO₂ doesn't decrease on load, or if it bounces around, sometimes you'll see it go to 30, then 10, and 45, then 10, and stuff like that. Then you need to reposition the device. And this repositioning and this repeating of the Moxy device, in my mind's eye, is device familiarization for you as a researcher, or whoever is assisting with placing the Moxy. So this is a really important, often overlooked process that I think more individuals need to focus on going forward. So it's not as simple as 10, 10 centimeters up from the patella and then over. It is as simple as making sure you're finding an active muscle, making sure you're placing it on the muscle belly, and then testing to make sure that SmO₂ is responsive to the load that's being placed on it. And the big thing that I want to emphasize here is that the precision from the Moxy signal comes from the replacement of the device time and time and time again. So it's not that every single subject has 10 centimeters from the patella and then over. It's this individual was 12 and a half centimeters up up the patella, or up the vastus lateralis, and slightly more center. That's where the precision comes from. So you can measure this, or you can mark this with like a permanent marker or something along those lines, where the light shield goes on top of the muscle, and you can just mark where the light shield should go with permanent marker, and then you can repeat the testing, or not the testing, the placement of the Moxy time and time and time again. And the key here is that placement needs to be consistent within the same athlete. Like I said, I don't really mind if the placement is slightly different, as long as it's on the vastus lateralis of all the athletes, but the placement needs to be consistent within the same athlete time and time and time again. All right, so those are the three big keys: active muscle, make sure you place the Moxy on the muscle belly, and then make sure you have dynamic SmO₂. And those are the keys to placement. If you have any questions, please either comment down below, or, like I said, reach out to me. My email is Philip, Philip, at moxymonitor.com. I'd be happy to jump on a Zoom call or answer any questions via email that you have. Thanks.